thank you everyone for joining. My name is Caroline Williams. I am the Engagement Manager First Nations at CRC Time. I'm a Yamaji woman from the Midwest Murchison and Gascoyne region. I'm presenting now from Wajak Nungapuja. Today I'm going to be talking about the Society for Ecological Restoration Conference and my trip to the US. This was supported by the Gale Fellowship and also CRC Time. I've got some invited guests as well, Associate Professor Andrew Knight from the ARC Training Centre for Healing Country and Dr. Lucy Commander from Alcoa. This photo in the background is taken about 4 hours drive outside of Bozeman, Montana in October this year after I attended the SER conference, which was in Denver, Colorado. Before I share my summary and experience of the trip, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands in which we work and live, and pay our respects to both elders past and present. This opportunity was to build our network overseas, directly engage with building relationships and raising our profile, sharing our work, but also to understand different ways of working and communicating common problems and solutions in restoring country mine closure and post-mining transitions. But also, it was a PD opportunity for me on many levels, academically, physically, spiritually, and culturally. I'm very, very thankful for the experience. So I'm going to run through some of the slides now on the conference, my learnings, before then inviting Andrew and then Lucy to give some comments and learnings as well. And then I will provide the overview for my learnings at my time in Montana. So as part of the SER conference, I joined a field trip to Daniels Park, which includes the Tallbull Memorial Grounds, which is a cultural area for the Native American community. The park is an hour's drive from Colorado. Lewis Tallbull, he's a Southern Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Lakota tribe nation member in the picture to the left, gave a fantastic talk on the medicine wheel, which has been created at the park. The 4 colors of the wheel, clockwise, black, red, yellow, and white, were symbolic of the 4 colors of man, 4 winds, 4 seasons, as well as they planted the medicinal plants in the wheel that represented those colors, which was really lovely. So at the park, it's home to prairie dog colony. There are around about 50 acres of land here, and the prairie dogs, they eat the vegetation at the park. The park's been managing their numbers to about a few thousand. There's not quite enough data yet to determine if there is enough of these species, if it's going to be sustainable. However, they're doing quite a lot of different restoration efforts using different methods such as rock dams and structures to stop erosion of the river and flood areas. You can see that in the top right-hand corner. That rock ridge there is helping to slow down some of the erosion of the lands. There's also a lot of sagebush that they're planting and reproducing there. They've been doing some trials on sagebush to determine what's the best practice options for cultivating the area, particularly where there is bison and prairie dogs in existence. The ecosystem there is supported by also the scarab dung beetle, which can also vary up to about 6 feet, depending on the sand. This is really also important for the soil nutrients. Dung beetle rely on the bison for existence. So at the turn of the 20th century, fewer than 1,000 bison remained in existence. Today it is estimated there are roughly 500,000 bison in North America. However, 30 million bison existed before settlers arrived, which is pretty sad. How many are lost now? The bison at Daniels Park are not genetically mixed with cattle like a lot of bison are these days. Currently, around 40 live there, and they are the descendants from the last wild bison in North America. They were established by the Denver Zoo and then transferred to the park, and they are looking to expand areas for the bison as well. The park also, in the past, donated surplus bison to the Cheyenne Arapaho tribes as well to return bison to their native homelands and reintroduce bison to tribal lands. What I heard as well at the conference is what is a way to accelerate restoration at the midpoint of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration? A good question, which was posed by James Rattling Leaf from the Sioux tribe in South Dakota, was, what is Indigenous restoration vision? According to James, Indigenous vision for restoration is renewal of the relationship, renewing human responsibility to the land and acknowledge humans are not inseparable from nature. Healing the land, we center on, repaying the land and not more extraction, meaning what do we give back to restore and not exploit again? For the Native American people to bring back buffalo, you're bringing back restoration. This is a big part of climate adaptation and bringing back tribal nations as well to lands. Reconciliation and restoration is connected. We need to grow our leaders, but we also need new economic models to fund that, which means investing and working towards Indigenous vision for restoration. Restoration solutions need to be built on nature and community-based solutions. Indigenous people are combining restoration with healing of the territory in a spiritual way, and we see that in America. So in Australia, we also must heal our land and reconnect with it to heal ourselves as well. It was evident throughout the conference that restoration needs a human rights-based approach. Restoration research is grounded in the human rights principles. Protecting ecosystems also means protecting the people who defend and depend on them. Restoration efforts must ensure inclusion, participation, and protection for all community involved. However, safety and accountability in environmental action is really important, and governments have a responsibility to adopt clear safety protocols for environmental defenders, activists, and community members, especially when projects involve traveling out to high-risk areas. So ensuring accountability and protection is essential for a sustained progress. We need to confront economic opposition. Corporate resistance remains a significant barrier. Many companies view restoration as economically disadvantageous. So in the short term, this mindset must shift. Restoration should be recognised as a long-term investment in sustainability, resilience, and social stability. From commitment, we need to have action. So there was a major theme of the conference, which was there's a gap between pledges and practice. While global restoration targets exist, practical steps are needed to overcome financial, political, and logistical barriers. Collaboration among governments, NGOs, Indigenous groups, and the private sector is key to turning commitments into measurable outcomes. We also need to change perceptions and build trust. Some stakeholders perceive global environmental targets as a threat to their economic or political interests. So building dialogue demonstrated shared benefits, promoting transparency, which are crucial to shift these perceptions and achieve progress collectively. Okay, I'm going to share some case studies where I heard there were so many case studies. It was such a, condensed but very comprehensive conference. So I'm just going to share a few case studies that I would like to elaborate a little bit on. One was building native food forests that support wildlife and people. This was through Fairfax, USA. The presenter, Sarah Roth, discussed how foraging and food forests can inspire communities to reimagine food systems that support nature rather than undermine it, fostering biodiversity and community engagement. So in 2023, at George Mason University in Northern Virginia, there was a 10-acre parcel of land which was formerly used for like student apartment buildings, and that was restored through a $40,000 grant. And the restoration efforts that they did was planting 2,000 native trees representing 57 species, which emphasize fruit-bearing and food-producing varieties. They applied the Milwaukee method to accelerate forest regeneration and improve soil health. That method was designed in Japan to create fast-growing and self-sustaining native forests, which includes like woody and mixed species to enhance biodiversity and ecological resilience. Some of the outcomes of this was the goal was to support wildlife habitats through keystone planting, species that served as a food source. So they were producing berries, nuts, fruits to sustain the food web and provide local foraging opportunities. They created a living classroom for students, integrating social events, education, and sustainability practices. It also served as a model for urban land repurposing and community-based ecological restoration. Okay, there is around about 500 abandoned mines that I learned. These are uranium mines on Navajo lands. Broadly, there's about 4,000 across the country. There's Arizona Mine A and B in Navajo Nation, which is about 300 meters from houses. Lots of dust that's airborne, causing real problems to the community there. The arsenic levels have caused skin, lung, bladder problems in the residents. They say reported memory loss and diabetes in children. The EPA standards in Navajo Nation is quite limited, so there are some unregulated wells that continue to be used, even though they contain unsafe concentrations of contaminants like uranium and arsenic. So there are scientists that are now exploring the use of biocrusts to contain the contaminants. Biocrusts are communities of cyanobacteria, algae, lichen, and fungi. And there's more to that as well. But for example, they form like a mat on the soil surface, and these biocrusts secrete sticky residue, binding soil together. So biocrusts and cyanobacteria grow to help with the dust reduction and contaminants because they hold and absorb stabilized metal contaminants. So they're really good at like trapping the metal. So the future direction is that they hope they can use, the hope is that they can use biocrust as a partial solution to uranium and arsenic contamination. So the race is now on to both understand biocrusts more fully and to discover how to regenerate these ecological environments. Such technologies could present mankind with useful tools to combating environmental changes. So there was a case study also looking at abandoned mine monitoring technologies. Very quick overview, this project looks at the land ecosystems and other environmental features to manage the mine area in a complete and organised way. Its goal was to restore damaged ecosystems and help nature recover naturally. Depending on how damaged the area is and how resilient the ecosystems are, the project uses new technologies for disaster prevention and ecological restoration. They use this monitoring to carry out the protection and recovery efforts. So there was a mine in Shawnee in a Linfen mine, I think it was in China. They represented a model of integrating the different technologies with the ecosystem restoration. The focus area included disaster elimination and environmental monitoring using 3D scanning and geographic information systems, revegetation and slope stabilization based on data-driven analysis, assessment of those ecosystems, the resilience of them, and the long-term sustainability. But the key challenges for this project was overcoming engineering and excessive investment costs, very expensive. How could they also reduce efficiencies? Limited adoption of nature-based solutions, and there was a heavy reliance on infrastructure, low economic returns, creating, and also, funding gaps. So the future directions of this is emphasizing nature-based restoration and cost-effective adaptive design, enhancing multi-stakeholder collaboration and social capital investment, integrating real-time digital monitoring systems to improve adaptive management and resilience assessments. We heard a lot of presentations on salmon restoration. I learned about how they are removing dams within rivers to restore salmon, particularly in the Klamath River in southern Oregon. The river is about 257 miles long. They partnered with traditional owners to do seed collection and produce seedlings. The Native American people believe like it's full circle restoration. When you heal the land, then you're also healing the people doing that work. So by putting the seedlings on the riverbanks and putting the soil back helps to produce that environment, to reduce flooding and erosion. They put dead trees along the river, which mimic sort of natural tree fall. It's a habitat for bugs and fish, but it also adds to the aquatic water quality being improved, and it was an ideal environment for salmon spawning. Sometimes that wood degrades and they need to keep on replacing it. That's what they're sort of learning, is that these tree logs really help with the salmon, particularly predatory birds trying to attack the salmon. These logs really help with that, and the hydraulic deepening of the channel through like the altered water patterns. Previously, they have had no salmon spawn for like 100 years in the area, and now they've got salmon spawning, which is really amazing. Another case study in Australia looked at restoring seascapes, and that was by Griffith University. They were looking at improving fish identification along the South Australian coastline using underwater cameras. This was a response to the global loss of shellfish reefs, which is one of the most endangered ecosystems, with like 85% of natural reefs lost worldwide. So they were using ways to identify, measure, and count fish, including the juveniles, using an AI model which tracks fish biomass per hectare of reef. So, for example, maybe 6 tonnes of fish per hectare. Observations showed that fish were using the restored reefs and also beyond the reef edge. So the real benefits here was that the AI system allowed them to have more faster and accurate monitoring, rather than the manual system of like taking a video and manually counting them. This technology can also be applied to other environmental monitoring, such as looking at, visitors to a beach, or to understanding what's happening on a wetland. We also heard from one of our partner organisations, BHP, about the collaborative initiative between Bunjima Native Title Aboriginal Corporation, Michelle Adams and Jonathan Fisher. They presented from BHP. My sort of summary of what the focus was looking at restoring the mine affected areas on Bunjima lands, using holistic approaches combining like cultural knowledge, community engagement, sustainable mine rehabilitation. They had, in 2023, 30 trainees participate, and 10 of those transferred into full-time employment on the Yandi site. So there was seed collection and nursery production. It was really good because they had like family engagement activities happening through the restoration process. The impact is that it prioritizes long-term relationships, intergenerational benefits, and economic opportunities. It demonstrated that cultural knowledge plus collaboration equals more sustainable and successful restoration outcomes. I also heard some information on acid mine drainage studies. This was a South African study which focused on assessing employees and stakeholder perceptions of sustainability practices within the mining operations. There was a lot of gaps that were identified and areas for improvement. They looked at 24 mines as their target group for review to understand if water conversations are happening and if the company used green water management practices. So the findings of it was that mining companies implemented strategies for water conversation and reduced water use, preventing water pollution from mine wastewater. However, transparent reporting of water issues was like 54%. According to the respondents, they didn't have any opinion on the practices of their company, and 10% of the respondents believed that disclosures or reports by their mining companies were credible and accurate. So there is real areas for improvement there, developing and implementing sort of comprehensive corporate water plans, hiring skilled staff to do the management of these water issues. The highlights were that there are critical issues for mining companies, policymakers and researchers to consider in planning and operations for sustainable mining. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it across to Professor Andrew Knight to discuss what he heard.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Your slide, can you see your slides okay?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
You're just following on from Carolyn. I just want to acknowledge the Whadjuk people in the Noongar Nation from where I'm speaking from today, as well as the Southern Ute Indian tribe and Ute Mountain tribe that were the custodians of the land where the conference was, and also the Machubda Indian tribe up near Chico in California, where I spent some time that emerged out of the work that we collaborated on for the presentation I'm going to talk about today. Next slide, please, or next click. So, yeah, essentially the reason why Carolyn got us all together was because we turned up and bumped into each other at one of the forums. So that was good to see that there was an Australian presence there, which was kind of small, but I guess that was probably the political climate that's happening in the US at the moment. So on behalf of Healing Country and the Native Seed Technology and Innovation Hub that I'm affiliated with, and also less formally affiliated with CRC Time, we presented a symposium which was designed to reflect the diversity of approaches that cross-cultural collaboration can take. So we had a creative artist from a group called Virtual Voices, who was Lee, who's based in Denver. And she's a visual artist and a storyteller and a poet. And she's been working on 2 case studies over the last roughly 20 years. And one has been in Haiti, and telling the story of people that are in Haiti in terms of the restoration of small community gardens. And if you've seen how Haiti's going in the news recently, it's really, really struggling with a lot of violent crime and civil unrest. And so she talked a bit about the challenges associated with using restoration as a vehicle to lift people up out of the challenges that they're facing in that sort of situation. And she also talked about African-American garden that was set up 20 years ago, with a group of then and still now elderly African-American women. And they were talking about restoration as an intergenerational process where these women's ancestors they were slaves from the Caribbean, and they had sown seeds for culturally important plants into their clothing when they were taken forcibly to America, because all they could take was the clothes they were standing in, but they wanted to take these plants of cultural importance with them. So that was a very strong message around the importance of intergenerational transfer of knowledge, and an example of the hardship that people are prepared to go through in order to bring those plants with them so that they could have the medicines and those sorts of things that they provided. So that was a very different take to the one that we would normally hear from restoration ecologists. And then Don Hankins, who's with the University of California at Chico, that's one of the smaller campuses, or the 11 campuses that State University there has. And he would describe himself as a pyrogeographer. I guess we'd probably call him a fire ecologist here. And he presented a lot on some systems that are similar to what we get in the Southwest, these Mediterranean type systems that they also get in California. And he was talking about experiences of doing cultural burning with different groups. So the group that he works mainly with is the Machuba Indian tribe that I mentioned in my introduction. And just talking about the ways in which fire is used to maintain culture, as well as do things like remove weeds and improve regeneration of different plant species. And then I spoke in an overarching presentation looking at the way in which we're training PhDs and postdocs at the ARC Centre for Healing Country in cross-cultural collaborative restoration, and some of the concepts that we're using to try and promote robust and resilient ways of learning when we're working across the students that are working as part of the centre, the Aboriginal communities that we're collaborating with, and the partner organisations that we're also working with, and just looking at some of the concepts and the practices or the strategies that we're employing through students to train them so that that tripartite relationship delivers restoration outcomes. So the topics were intentionally diverse to demonstrate the value of, for example, bringing the arts into restoration and the importance of fire, as well as ways of educating the next generation of restoration ecologists. Click, please. So I guess to summarise all that, I was really looking at the way that we learn about doing restoration on Noongar Budja. Don was really looking at pyrogeography for ecological restoration and the way that can be done in a culturally appropriate manner. And Lili was really about how do you use stories to promote restoration in highly developed urban contexts where communities are suffering great intergenerational trauma. Next, please. One of the great things that was going on there was, excuse me, the 2023 Society for Ecological Restoration meeting was in Darwin, and it was an excellent event. And one of the things that was started, or the activities that was started, was by people from the ARC Centre for Healing Country and CRC Time. So you'll see on the picture on the right there, Christian Miller-Sabioni, for example, who helped develop the Indigenous Participation Guidelines, and Heidi Mippy, who was then with the Centre for Healing Country, and she's now doing a PhD with us. And they ran yarning circles there, and they were hugely successful and very popular. So Heidi arranged for some message sticks to be created, and they were passed on to the North American organising committee. And the idea now is that they'll be passed on from conference organiser to conference organiser. And the second part of that is holding what they are calling sharing circles. So there were, I think, 8 of them that were there, and they were very popular. There was usually more people that were turning up than the session could hold. And the first one that I attended there on behalf of the centre and CRC Time informally was looking at knowledge sharing across international lands and waters. So we had North Americans, we had Brazilians, we had Hawaiian, Indigenous people. I was there from Australia, and I popped into several of these, and the authentic sharing that people were doing in terms of the way that they use restoration, either for research or for cross-cultural collaboration or for rehabilitating mines, for example, was really powerful. So I just wanted to share the fact that that distinctly Australian Aboriginal or and Torres Strait Islander practice has now actually got a life beyond the Darwin Conference, and it's adding value to these events as they move forward. So that was a great thing to see. Thanks, Carolyn. So Carolyn talked about a few presentations that were presented there, and there's some really good ones, a couple of Indigenous sessions that were excellent. And if you haven't been to an SER meeting before, I'd encourage you to go, because the international profile, particularly around Indigenous communities, is increasing. And there were some useful things that I really learned. One of the interesting presentations I saw was by somebody from BHP and talking about working with range teams in the Pilbara region. So it was really good to see what's being done with the mining sector, or by the mining sector, with community, and promoting the interests of Indigenous communities through Aboriginal ranger programs, and using restoration as a vehicle for employment whilst restoring country. And one thing I noticed across lots of the different talks, and it was prominent in the BHP presentation, was very few people talked about when things didn't go wrong. So they talked about challenges that they might face, but they're normally framed in terms of their pursuit of success rather than what actually didn't work. And I think that as researchers and practitioners from whether it's mining companies or universities, consultancies or Aboriginal corporations, this space is only going to get increasingly complex as, for example, Indigenous people's values who have been marginalised historically are increasingly brought into this space. And we're only going to be effective, most effective, if we start talking about what doesn't work well. And yeah, I guess just sort of putting that out there for people to consider if you're giving a presentation into the future. And we'll be pushing for a failure session at the next event in 2 years' time. Next slide, please, Carol. And then, having presented with Don Hankins, one of the things that Healing Country is doing in a couple of different fronts is looking at fire and its importance and effects for restoring country. And so this would be applying to mine sites and offset sites as well in Western Australia. And I was lucky enough that the climatic conditions, the weather, and a class that Don runs coincided, and they went out and did a cultural burn. So Don's a native Californian, and he took his class out there. I was kind of surprised that he actually lets the students start the fires, which I don't think Curtin University would probably come at as a tertiary education institution regarding its risk management policy. But it was really good to see that students were getting out there, and there was a lot of explanation from those two gentlemen on the right-hand figure, who were two of the recognised Machiba Indian tribe representatives who sanctioned Don to do the burn, which was on it's a university field station, but it's on Machiba land. And so that was a nice cultural handover for the day. And one of the reasons why burning is important, and Caroline was alluding before about trout and salmon, is the burning regime needs to be appropriate to ensure that the turbidity of the water in the creeks and the rivers around this landscape, and particularly at the bottom of the reserve here, that the burning regime minimises the amount of sediment that's going into the river, because it's affecting the trout and the salmon. So one of the young men there talked quite a bit about the importance of the way that they burn and the importance of that as a system. And he really engaged us while we were there. You're not allowed to eat trout or salmon in California at the moment because of how dry things are and the fact that they're IUCN listed species. But as an Indigenous traditional owner, they are allowed to harvest. So he had smoked a salmon and shared that with us, and he'd done that a traditional way. So that was a lovely gesture to experience with him. So from that, I took away some learnings about like how to run a course on what Don would call pyrogeography, or like fire ecology, the way that we can bring that traditional fire knowledge together with the Western science. And it was just a really good day where people really pitched in what they knew and swapped ideas. Thanks, Carol.
Thank you so much. So now I would like to introduce Dr. Lucy Commander to also talk about fire ecology and some of the learnings that she had from her experience.
Thanks, Caroline. Hi, I'm Lucy Commander. I lead the research team at Alcoa. I was super lucky enough to go to SER in Denver this year. I've been going to SER conferences on and off since 2005, but I've never been to one in the United States. So it was really great to be able to have the opportunity to go there and listen to all of the cool research and practitioner talks that are going on across the States and also across the world. So I gave a presentation titled Advancing Mine Rehabilitation and Forest Management Through Collaborative Science-Driven Research. And I mentioned a few of the collaborative projects that we have going with CRC Time, particularly in the sort of the seed sourcing and seed delivery space. So it was great to be able to have that opportunity to share our knowledge as well. On the first day of the conference, I went on a pre-conference field tour to the Calwood Education Centre. So here's a couple of photos from the day. It was a really great day out. It was very high elevation. We hiked up to 8,000 feet, which, you know, was a bit rough when you've just kind of got off a plane. And Calwood is a really special place. They started in around 1982 as an outdoor education area. And so, yeah, we talked a lot during the day about sort of human nature connection. They've got a place where children can stay sort of dormitory style. They're able to take really young children out there to do outdoor education. We passed a class of grade ones hiking through the area, which was very cute. They also do education for Spanish speakers, and they actually do that in their language as well. And so I thought that was really great. They have this kind of mission to be able to connect people with nature. But in the year 2000, October 2000, they had a fire that went through the property, and it actually burnt around half of their property plus a lot more area off their property as well. And they'd never had a fire through their area before. So apart from obviously the initial firefighting efforts that had to happen, then they're kind of figuring out what to do to restore the area after the fire. So this, what was really interesting about the fire ecology was that fire has been suppressed in that ecosystem for around 100 years. And due to this absence of fire, the trees are actually, so normally when you get a fire through the understory, that will clear out some of the new seedlings and keep a good amount of tree spacing. But without fire, the tree density is increased, so that when you do have a fire, instead of just being a ground fire, it actually turns into a canopy burn. So the pictures on the left-hand side of the slide here, you can see, basically all of these dead sticks standing, and they've been there now for 5 years. So they were talking about sort of some of the restoration strategies that they were using, and you can see me there planting a little seedling. So they got us out there planting trees as well for some of the species that aren't naturally regenerating. So yeah, it was really interesting opportunity to have a look at human nature connectedness and also some fire ecology. And also really interesting to think about supply chains in restoration as well, which applies to all forms of restoration and rehabilitation that's plant-based, whether that's post-fire or post-mining. And so they were talking about how they really needed to kind of improve capacity in the seed supply chain and in the nursery as well, because they needed to get seedlings in. So they've got, you know, new nurseries have sprung up and risen to the challenge of providing seedlings for this particular area to do some replanting. They're also talking about preventative actions for the future, and it's actually really challenging to get permissions for planned burns. So yeah, I guess there's this really interesting story about how, you know, the traditional way of land management is not being followed, and then there's been some sort of adverse impacts, and then they're trying to figure out what to do about it. So that was really fascinating and great to get out into the field with some like-minded people. Next slide, please, Caroline. So in terms of the conference as a whole, I just wanted to echo Caroline's thoughts on the salmon restoration. I thought that was a really standout project where they are restoring salmon habitat across multiple states in the United States of America, and also with multiple different stakeholders, land managers, traditional owners, and lots more people. So that was really interesting to see those really large scale restoration programs. But I also wanted to talk about networks. I went to a really great session on implementing the US National Seed Strategy, and got to meet a lot of people whose documents I've read, Peggy Olwell and others. And that was really interesting to see how lots of different people within the US are sort of working together to build a seed strategy. And this is seed for conservation, but also seed for seed-based restoration as well across the United States. And since I'd been involved with some of the seed strategy for Australia, I thought that was really fascinating. There's also a picture of the meetup or group meeting for the International Network for Seed-Based Restoration, which is a sort of a subgroup within SER. So great to meet some sort of seed-based restoration folks from across the world and find out what they're up to. I also found out about the American Society of Reclamation Sciences, and I thought that was really interesting. They call mine rehabilitation reclamation. And so it was really interesting to sort of hear some perspectives of people working in the industry over there. And I also heard about the Mine and Quarry Restoration Network in Spain as well, which apparently is a new network. So I'm going to do a bit of digging and find out a little bit more about that. So I just, I thought that was really interesting to see kind of how SER brings people together, but then there's also lots of special interest groups within that larger organisation, and lots of touch points with other like-minded organisations as well. And I guess because I've been an SER board, SERA, so SER for Australasia board member in the past, it was great to meet up with some of the SERA folks as well. Only last thing to say is that if you're interested in finding out more, they've got the abstracts available online. So if you wanted to go to the website, you can actually click through and read and use the search function for a keyword search and read about some of the really interesting projects that are happening all over the world. I think that's, pretty much it. Thanks, Caroline.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. And it was really great to catch up with you and Andrew and Michelle and many others. And like I said, it's a great opportunity for networking and expanding knowledge. I was lucky to go to the 2023 in Darwin as well. So it was just an unbelievable opportunity to go to America to experience this one. And hopefully I can go to another one. We'll see, fingers crossed. So now I want to talk a bit about my post-SER conference trip where I went to Montana. And let's change my slide. There we go. So the trip to Montana, beautiful Montana, definitely going to go back. So if there's a way, I'll find a way to get back there. Professor of Geography and Department Head of Earth Sciences at Montana State University, Dr. Julia Haggerty, organised a student visit with myself as guest to explore the Native American views on mining and restoration. This photo is of the Crow Agency on Crow Reservation with Ben Burton, students, and the Crow Agency, Bighorn County Commission and Crow Tribal Elder John Doyle and Charlene Johnson from Crow Agency. So Crow Agency is a community in the southeastern Montana that is home to the Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument, which is a national memorial respecting the Battle of the Little Bighorn, which took place in 1876 on Crow Indian reservations. We heard about the Crow perspectives on the Yellowtail Dam, completed in 1967 across the Bighorn River, and how the tribes were tricked into signing over the dam. There was the mountain versus the River Crow that wanted to lease while the River Crow wanted to sell. So divisions over this decision kind of split the tribe. It was about 300 to 400 people that voted. And unfortunately, now it's $26 million a year that is lost in opportunities because they chose that decision. So US versus Montana in 1981, there was a case that gave away the water rights for the river, which was also a great loss. There are many issues that are being discussed, and we had the opportunity to hear some of those. There are some mixed views on alternative energy as well. It's been like 65 years since the dam was built, and the tribes are still living with that decision and the negative outcomes. there's a lot of infighting with tribes that contribute to poverty, and there is a division between the haves and have-nots. The people living in tents without any power. So this mistake really cost the tribes billions of dollars. You know, the Crow Reservation has some really great things as well, though, that they have on offer, which is like the Little Bighorn College. They're very proud of this achievement for the tribes. Yeah, and like I said, there's high energy costs, so it's actually quite difficult to progress in the area. To get land is not so hard, but to actually get a house put on the land is difficult, and solar panels are costing so much. So yeah. Down the river is also another proposed second dam. So it'd be interesting to see what happens here. This other dam is called Afterbay. The tribe has contracted with Canadian Hydro, but it may not go ahead as electricity generation needs a buyer. There is still significant environmental degradation on the reservation as well, and there's no funds for restoration. There's ongoing agriculture upstream, which kind of leaves sediment build up on methylated mercury behind the dam, creating another financial burden. So if the tribe was to gain ownership over the dam, this would have to be looked at as well. There's really high levels of PFAS in the water, and they are found in the fish. Like I mentioned, alternative energy options are being explored, but solar panels are too expensive. They are looking at wind. There is a perfect site for wind generation, but it happens to be on cultural sites, burial grounds. And additionally, like, there's no buyer for the wind power, and there's no transmission lines. The world is moving towards the energy transition, and our Indigenous brothers and sisters are still catching up with the historical unjust and exclusion policies globally. So this really sets people behind. These policies, you know, have undermined Indigenous people at the decision table. But moving forward, Australia and other countries are learning not to repeat those mistakes from the past, especially in the mining sector and energy transition. Good governance models, cohesive collaboration, and transparency is what is needed. So over the field trip weekend, we included a drive to Lame Deer, which is a Cheyenne reservation, and we had a look at Coal Strip before heading back to Bozeman. The Cheyenne reservation is also northern Cheyenne, included in the Battle of the Little Bighorn. The northern and southern Cheyenne didn't get along, forced to move into the Oklahoma and Dodge City until they were allowed to return home. Northern Cheyenne developed renewable solar farms on their native lands. However, there's like 50,000 people that still lack electricity. And there are ongoing debates about coal. We saw a building which had $50 million worth of solar panels, which were then removed. So there's sort of shifting views on coal, which is ongoing. As it was the weekend, most of the venues were closed, including the the Northern Cheyenne Congress and the Native Market. The market provided economic assistance and business setup for tribal people, computer services, and also as a supply store. It was really great just looking around the town and getting a feel for the place. Here's a couple of photos. This is the historic preservation Congress, and the playground and the side here, the children's playground. And we then headed down to Coal Strip, which was quite an interesting town with a lot of story behind it. We met with Jim Atkinson's Southeastern Montana Development Corporation. He's the Regional Economic Development Executive Director, and he's responsible for Custer, Rosebud, and other nearby towns. Colstrip itself has about 2,000 plus people live there, and they're mostly retirees and mine workers. The Colstrip is like a city in the Rosebud County. Coal stream strip mining took place and is taking place. They have a number of decommissioned stacks now, and the others are continuing to operate until unknown date in the future. But power is generated from here all the way up to Seattle. There are lawsuits also over the emissions because there's lots of dirty coal. The refinery here is quite old. It was developed a long time ago and brought over from Sweden. And I think the next upgrade to it is in 2043 is when they'll need to replace it. And the problem is it's also owned by more than one proponent. So I think Northwest Energy owns part of the utility, but yeah, there's how they will do that will be a good question. The town is owned by the mining company. Everything gets funded by the mining company in this town. There's quite a lot of services. It's quite a cute little town actually, but very, very close to the stack. And I was interested to see what sort of pollution affects the town. But apparently the pollution seems to be downstream. There's so many services in the town, and the community seem quite close-knit. If the power plant was to shut down, which people would be very upset with, and in the past they were quite upset when there was news that they may shut down, people would lose their investments in their houses. They would be worth nothing. So it's a real dilemma. There's also mention of a lake called Castle Rock, which is a man-made, I don't have a photo, unfortunately, but there's a man-made lake, which is holding the water for the power generator. It's a recreational space for the town at the same time, and it's quite pretty. It was very freezing at the time though and rainy, so I didn't get a picture. So Colstrip, this is just a picture that was taken in the office on the wall. Just shows you how huge it is. It's a landmass of around 10.49 square kilometres with a population, like I said, of about 2,000, or it could grow to 3,000 people. It was established in 1924 and is the largest city in Rosebud. Around 400 workers work at this plant, including many Native Americans, and some of them live in Colstrip as well. I was curious to find out if the Native Americans from the Cheyenne Reservation could access the services in the town, because it's very completely different to the reservation. So the answer was yes, that they're allowed to come and use the services, which is great. As I mentioned, they had 4 coal-fired plants until a decision to only keep 2 operating, and that was in 2016. There was a decision to keep that extension because of the grid reliability that they needed to guarantee. But unfortunately, they're still operating without modern pollution controls, apparently. And when I mentioned the lake, I found out that the water is actually coming from the Yellowstone River, which is like 48 kilometers away, and it's stored at the town lake for the plant. Quite a pretty little area though. I got a chance to, just we were driving past, we seen these deer just in the park there, and yeah, that's the first time I saw deer, so it was pretty cool. We heard about the Berkeley pit as well, which is an environmental disaster in Butte. It's a massive pit, former copper mine outside of Montana, and it's connected to the Anaconda Company's operations. It's an open pit that was once a major source of copper as well as silver and gold, but it shut down in 1982 and is now very toxic, extremely acidic body of water that represents environmental challenges. There has been attempts to assess remediation options like neutralizing the acidity with alkaline tailings fluid. Yeah, the Berkeley pit is it's very huge, but people can go there and visit it. We didn't visit it, but there's a platform that you can go up to and see this amazing eyesore. I also had the pleasure of presenting at Montana State University as a guest lecturer for Zachary Burton's class. He's the assistant professor of critical resources, and it was his geography students that I was able to talk about our work here in Australia. So these photos are also when I went across to, which is on campus, the American Indian Hall, and I met with the department head and associate professor Meredith Hecker from the Blackfeet tribe. So yeah, it was a really amazing opportunity, and I'm very, very grateful and thankful for Julia's amazing coordination and organisation to make that possible. But to kind of wrap up and to look at, the next steps, wanted just to say that leading practice needs to then incorporate the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights for Indigenous Peoples principles. It really is important to set out these principles so that Aboriginal people can, or all Indigenous people can have self-determination to their lands and territories and resources, and to participate in the decision-making that affects them. Leading mine closure and restoration practice means mining companies must align their processes with these international obligations and principles. Free, prior and informed consent is so important for Indigenous communities before significant operations start, ensuring that we have this participation at all stages. Really see the importance of that when I went to those reservations. Values, very context sensitive. It varies between stakeholders, land use, history, cultural meaning of the land, environmental expectations, and economic conditions. These values change over time as mines are developed and operations close and land transitions and new uses are considered. So restoration planning must be anticipated of these evolving values. A systematic perspective means that we are mapping those values, tracking and changing and embedding them into the mine closure and restoration life cycle from the very start. We need to have the complete understanding of the stakeholder values in restoration and mine closure planning, and that requires a systematic perspective. Planning for mine closure and restoration isn't just about ecological remediation, it's about social, cultural, economic and governance dimensions. It includes all stakeholders, Indigenous peoples, local communities, future land users, regulators, companies, workforce, etc. And just to reiterate, early and continuous engagement with all stakeholders and mapping and documenting their values and aspirations. Indigenous voices need to be fully included in these analyses that happen and all future exploration activities. As we understand that Indigenous peoples have this deep cultural, ecological and spiritual relationship with the land and the water and diversity. As Lucy mentioned, fire stick farming is a practice that shows how important that is and how smart that is. And this is stuff that needs to be listened to. Yeah, so I think that's about it. That's the end of my presentation. And I just wanted to thank everybody, Lucy and Andrew, and everyone for attending today. I also just wanted to reiterate that this made happen by the Gale Fellowship at UWA and also and CRC Time. I just wanted to thank staff and management for making it happen.